welcome to Agreeable Disagreements. My name is Cameron, and this is my co-host, Andrew.
This is a podcast where two friends with differing political ideologies come together and talk about an event from the week's politics. This week, we're doing something a little different. We're going to be a little more philosophical and less topical. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about the Trump's classified documents.
Yes. So is this a new one that's happened, or is this still the one that happened a few months ago, or is this just new information about that one?
This is new information. It's basically the I don't remember if it's was through the DOJ or the FBI, but basically the prosecutors that have been working on this case so far have found, I believe it's a recording of Trump admitting that he knowingly took classified documents. And up until this point, what he's been claiming is that he didn't do anything wrong because he had declassified these documents, even though you don't just get to, wave a magic wand and say these things are declassified. Gotcha. So right. He's basically what that's done is that's opened him up to being prosecuted under the Espionage Act. And other people who have, there have been defense contractors who have been in similar situations, and it's they've been sentenced to several years in prison, which looks like it could be a possibility for Trump.
So looking at a CNN article about this, and I apologize to listeners, I had a little bit late start to my evening, and so I'm eating dinner. But looking at the article, it says that it was about a potential attack on Iran from summer of 2021.
Yes.
And it also says, though, CNN has not listened to the recording, which, if it's still going to trial, that's understandable.
That doesn't surprise me.
Right. But multiple sources described it. One source said the relevant portion on the Iran document is about 2 minutes long. Another said the discussion is a small part of a much longer meeting.
Yeah. I think what it points to, though, is his deception in just the case so far. So
right.
Basically, I mean, it was troubling that he had so many documents at his private residence. It was troubling when he gave so much pushback to the retrieval of those documents. I think this is kind of the nail in the coffin, where it's, I think, pretty clear that he was intentionally holding on to these documents. And I think using them for nefarious means. I think it's also worth noting that one of Iran's, biggest rivals or enemies, whatever you want to call it, is Saudi Arabia. And I think if I read an article correctly earlier today, and I wish I had that so I could cite my sources, but it coincides with the timeline of Jared Kushner receiving a huge sum of money from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. That leads me to, at least the part of my brain that will entertain conspiracy theories, which, normally I don't. That leads me to believe that the reason why he took these specific documents could be that he was planning on selling them to the Saudis. And I think really that's the whole reason why he took all of the documents anyway, is so that he could make money off of them, and he's already admitted that he wanted to sell them back to the the Library of Congress, which is not a thing that you do. You
Right.
don't get to sell classified documents back to the government after you've stolen them.
So I think it's important to make a couple of distinctions here. And I think I'm not going to say that there's not some nefarious purpose going on. And I'm not a Trump fan.
Speculation, I think, on my part, on the journalist part so far. But I think it's, a reasonable accusation.
I don't know, because let's think. One, what's he going to do with documents from a potential attack on Iran that would have been relevant years before? And then two, in that same recording, this is again according to CNN, Trump's comments suggest he would like to share the information, but he's aware of his limitations on his ability post-presidency to declassify records. Two of the sources who listened to it have said.
So, to address the first part,
sure.
Sorry, what was the wording that you used?
Here, I will send you this article in the chat while I'm saying it. But I would say that I'm not 100% sure that this is nefarious because, one, what would he do with documents about a potential attack on Iran that was relevant a couple years prior,
I think it's
but isn't necessarily, and it might still be relevant.
I think what we're looking at is a canary in the coal mine. I think this is the thing that got caught, and while this specific set of documents, or whatever he got caught red-handed with, is just it's the tip of the iceberg. It's the one piece that he slipped up on, and there's more to be found, especially considering how hard he fought to not only keep the documents, but keep any further investigation of his residences or his communications. The second part about him saying that he would like to release these documents, but he knows he can't. I think that's just Trump being his normal, just doofus self.
Well, I don't know, because I would be interested to know how much of a difference there is between the Trump that we see on TV, the personality Trump, and the in-meetings Trump.
I really don't think there is a difference.
See, but you say that, but you could say the same thing about personality, TV, Bernie Sanders and AOC, and then behind the scenes, AOC and Bernie Sanders, or Jared Kushner, or...
Yeah, they have the wherewithal to know the right time and the right place. I think Trump is just a buffoon every time, no matter what the situation is.
I think you would be surprised how much of it is performative. Now, that's... I don't have any insider information on that, other than I've seen several... We're getting to the point now where people who are in Congress are active on social media. Right. And I've seen a couple different representatives of the House who are newly in there talking about how much they thought that they were not going to get along with certain people in Congress based on what they saw from them on TV. Right. But then you get in there and the cameras are off and they're the chillest, nicest people.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say that that's how Trump is.
I've definitely seen that same thing.
Yeah.
But
I wouldn't be surprised. And the fact that he's saying he's aware of the limitations to declassify records tells me that he probably has something he wants to do with them, but he knows he can't or won't. Now, that being said, I do think you make a great point that this may be the only one he's talking about. He could have who knows how many other records. He could have a whole vault full of them, for all I know. And I think the important part here, as you pointed out, is that he knows he took them. He knows they're still classified.
Yeah.
And he is still holding on to them regardless.
Well, and he knowingly took that. He knew that they were classified when he took them. Now, I know that you had a counterpoint about. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring it up right as you're taking a bite of food.
Rise, I take a bite of leek. Come on, man.
You can't take a leak on the podcast, man. We talked about this already.
I have no rebuttal to that. Keep going.
But you wanted to bring up the fact that there are other presidents and public officials who haven't found the documents.
Right. And so the most recent would be President Biden.
Right.
And I think you mentioned before when we were doing our pre-meeting, there's a key point in context here. One is, it seems at least from the outside, and I would be willing to challenge this, but it seems at least that President Biden unintentionally kept them.
Yeah.
But that's what he says. And what happened was President Trump got caught, and so Biden talked to his lawyers and invited the FBI and Justice Department to follow up, search his places, find whatever they could find.
Right.
And I will say, I think that is to his credit that he saw something bad happening with somebody else and said, oh no, if I've accidentally done this, I want to be transparent about it and, do that. And that's totally fine. However, as the oldest child, when my siblings would get in trouble for something that I knew I was in trouble, I would get in trouble for too. If I didn't get it together real quick, I would go and clear stuff up. So my brother and sister are getting yelled at for not having cleaned up their crap. While they're in the process of being yelled at or getting in trouble, I go clean my crap up to try and avoid it.
As the younger sibling in my family, I know that tactic from the other side very well. But
I will say it never worked. I still got caught.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think Biden got caught too and received, justified backlash from it.
Okay, but the difference is he's not going to trial.
Right.
And he had way more in way more locations.
Is that true?
According to USA Today, Biden has had documents that were at his home in Wilmington, as well as his other locations, including his Rehoboth Beach house in Delaware. Okay. And these documents, granted, some of them are from his time as president, some of them are from his time as vice president, and some of them are from his time as a senator. So they're spanning a long time. So I guess I don't really know about total number, but it's something that he has been doing intentionally or unintentionally for a good chunk of time.
And I think that's what leads me to, I think the crux of your argument is that politicians keeping classified records is not a novel thing. We've seen it.
Yes.
We saw it with Biden, Pence, Obama, goes back a long time. The difference.
It goes back to George Washington. George Washington gave his papers to his nephew. It was so bad that we actually passed a law in 1978 that required all documents you had as president be turned over to the government. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just that Trump and Biden have both done it. It's that it's been an ongoing problem for such a long period of time that we have had to pass federal laws.
Why we didn't have
I'm not saying that makes it.
I have no idea. That seems like that should have been taken care of a long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, you got to remember that's post-Nixon era.
Yeah.
So Nixon's been out, and then it was, after Nixon, it was Carter, right? And then Carter, there was Reagan. And if this is passed in 78, then that's the end of Carter, beginning of Reagan, right? Am I doing that math right? Yes.
I have no idea.
When was Carter president? Okay, it would have been right at the beginning of Carter, end of Nixon. My bad. Okay. Carter's president from 77 to 81.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that would have been probably an aftermath blowback of the Nixon-Ford era.
Yeah.
Where Ford has to deal with everything that Nixon left him. And Congress is kind of reeling from all of that. But I'm not saying it's okay that they're taking these documents. I want that to be clear.
Right. I mean, I would agree. But I think the context is different in this case. And the fact that...
I think the context is different, but I also think that it's not being treated fairly.
I think all around I think this whole thing speaks to a lack of accountability on the government's part to protect sensitive information. I totally agree with that. And I think that that is an issue that needs to be dealt with systemically. However, none of the other people guilty of this, as far as we know, have done so much to try to actively skirt the laws, knowingly.
Yes, they have
skirted the laws, and been so eager to buddy up with what I would consider, some of America's biggest enemies, and also shown a propensity to be easily swayed by, those enemies and allow them to gain influence over him. So I think it's really troubling that Trump especially has classified documents when, Putin just needs to ask him nicely, and he probably would have, handed them over to him.
I don't know. I think we overplay how buddy-buddy Putin and Trump really were.
Oh, I don't think that they were actually buddy-buddy. I think that Trump really revered Putin and really, in some ways, wanted Putin's approval in a way that he never could have gotten from Frederick Trump Sr.
Sure.
Which, that's a whole other can of worms, but I think that Trump admires strong authoritarian power, and Putin is probably the best, modern example of that. And I think Trump really wanted to get the approval of Putin in that respect. And it would not have been surprising to me if he tried to garner that kind of, favorable treatment or opinion of himself through the trade of classified documents and therefore, national security.
So I think it's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to go the way you just described, which I don't know if I'm more or less inclined to believe, but it's going to either be like that, where people are, Trump is seeking the approval of Putin, or it's going to be he's seeking the ability to improve relations, because you could argue that he did the same thing with Kim Jong-un. He was one of the first presidents to have regular
improving relations with. De-escalating, yes, but we don't need to be improving. We don't need to be trying to become allies.
What's the difference?
Because de-escalating is, I think when you try to, if you're trying to become allies with them, you're either explicitly or tacitly endorsing what they're doing. What we need to be doing, and what we're not able to do because North Korea has, nuclear weapons and displayed a
Right.
willingness to use them. What you should be doing is, putting sanctions on them, not placating them. Trump was placating North Korea, which is like when you have a child that's misbehaving and you think, oh, they're screaming because they want candy. So the way that I'm going to get them to stop screaming is I'm going to give them candy. Any parent knows that's not how you deal with that. And that just creates a monster. That was Trump's
but at the same time,
Korea.
At the same time, though, like, it's not just about that. It's also about increasing our safety as the United States, because you're right. North Korea absolutely has demonstrated, at least vocally, their willingness to use nuclear weapons. Who knows how serious they are with that, because it's North Korea.
Yeah.
They could be super serious. They could be not at all. But I think it's a good choice to still talk to them and try and improve relations, whether it's through de-escalation or whatever. I see, because of the state that our relationship with North Korea is at, I see that as improving relations. De-escalating is the same, because you're trying to de-escalate to a point where you can have a good conversation.
I disagree. I think it's the same. And obviously, I mean, I don't think Kim Jong-un has as much power as Hitler did in, 1938 Germany. But I think it's.
I would argue he has way more.
I don't think so. I think
topic for another time.
I think the global isolation plays a factor in that. But
that's fair. That's fair.
I think one of the biggest mistakes of primarily Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom before Churchill, was trying to appease. I almost said appease Trump. It was trying to appease Hitler. That's a Freudian slip, if I've ever heard one.
Yeah. If you don't know what a Freudian slip is, that's where you think one thing but say your mother.
I see what you did there. Anyway, but I think that was one of Neville Chamberlain's biggest mistakes, was trying to appease Hitler, and then that allowed Hitler to not only rise to power, but also make such an advance politically and militarily that it allowed him to get to the point where he could, annex Poland or, invade France. I don't see,
but there's a whole lot
North
of other geopolitics
do that.
Well, and the reason for that is because of the geopolitics of the time, and that's we could do a whole episode on that. So I'm going to try and keep it to 15 seconds. Essentially, North Korea has China on their back, and has Russia on their back, and so they're not super worried about anything at the moment. Whereas Germany was the China and Russia, and so they could do essentially what Russia is trying to do with Ukraine right now.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think the difference is Neville Chamberlain didn't try and sit down with Hitler and try and be like, okay, let's talk. What's going on?
Yes,
how can we stop this from happening? I mean, my understanding, and I'll admit I could be wrong, because my knowledge of World War II is more about the Nazi side, not about the United Kingdom side. Mm-hmm. My understanding of it is that Neville Chamberlain was trying to enforce the sanctions, but did so poorly.
Yeah, but he made that decision to not enforce those sanctions, if I'm remembering correctly, after he went and met with Hitler and was like, actually, this guy isn't such a bad guy. And that enabled Hitler to, or just kind of empowered and legitimized Hitler.
See, but here's another thing, though. Because I would say Hitler was inherently deceitful because he didn't need to worry about his survival. Mm-hmm. Kim Jong-un does. And so I was living in Hawaii right after those meetings happened.
Mm-hmm.
And within a couple of weeks, we actually had a fake missile alert
Right.
that no one knew was fake.
Well, but that
so I
was
remember
because
waking up.
somebody followed the wrong procedure on a test alert.
Yes, essentially. Long story short, yes. And he thought that it was real or clicked the button that sent it out to everybody. And tons of people, rightfully, I think, freaked out, thinking, oh, North Korea's launched a missile at us.
Yeah.
But I had a sense of calm because I thought, no, Trump just met with Kim Jong-un, and they both said it was a good meeting, and they were open to talking more and to de-escalating. Why would this happen? So, I don't know. I feel like this is...
Sorry,
I feel like it was... I feel like it wasn't a bad thing to do.
I would maybe agree with you if Kim Jong-un wasn't guilty of mass murder, slavery, just, horrific war crimes. That's not somebody that we need to be bedfellows with.
Right, and I'm not going to defend Kim Jong-un. I'm defending the public safety of the United States. How are we able to try and put a stop to those things if we don't open some kind of conversation? There's got to be sanctions involved too. But I mean, let's look at China. China's doing all of those same exact things right now to their Uyghur population.
True.
We have no issues with that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get me wrong. I think that's a huge failing on our part. And I really don't view them any differently. But that doesn't mean I don't have the understanding that we rely on China a lot more than, we rely on North Korea.
Right. That's fair.
I think that we should be having less interaction with China unless, certain things stop. In particular, the genocide against the Uyghur population. But it's
just to interject, which president tried to cut ties with China some more because of these things?
Who?
Trump.
I don't think that that's why he tried. I don't think he cared about the Uyghur population. I think
he cited that as one of the reasons, but there's more to it. You're right. That's not. Yeah. I would say he was more about the business side of it. Yeah. I will admit, but he did cite that as part of the reason.
Yeah, he wanted to increase our pork and steel markets, and it actually ended up kind of backfiring.
I'll admit he did it poorly.
Yeah.
As far as that side of it goes, not the best execution, but I think the right idea.
I would.
Getting away from China and focusing more on United States manufacturing positions or improving our own side of the market so we don't have to rely on a country that's doing these terrible things we disagree with. I think that's great. The way he did it,
yes,
not so much.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree.
It's summer, the time of year when you will see that one friend posting to Instagram about a trip to either Europe or a tropical paradise, where they stay in a nice hotel, eat tons of fancy food, and go to all of those expensive tourist attractions you've always wanted to visit. All of this despite them complaining just a few months ago on Twitter about how they had no money and a crappy job which pays them half as much as yours pays you. You've probably looked at those photos of them under the Eiffel Tower or on a beach in Cozumel and asked yourself, how can they afford that? Well, I've got the answer for you. They can't. They're going into severe credit card debt. And you could too, if you stopped caring about future use finances and instead went for instant gratification right now. Who needs the promise of long-term financial security which will last you decades when you could fly to Rome for a few days and eat gelato for 15 whole minutes? Retirement plan? What's that? Invest in real estate by saving for a down payment on a house? Never heard of it. Stock market investments with compounding interest? That doesn't even sound like a proper sentence in English. Besides, who needs any of that when you can spend 5 years paying back more than $9,000 on a trip that cost you less than $6,000 in the first place? What are you going to use that extra $3,000 for anyway? Bettering yourself? And if you can't make your credit card payment, don't worry. Just take out another credit card and use that one to pay off the previous one. Don't wait. Go get your 15th credit card today. So this actually comes from a request from one of our listeners. My cousin, Harrison, actually pointed out that it might be easier to understand what we were saying and where we're coming from if we talk a little bit about what we think the purpose of government should be.
Right.
And I think this is important because I'm someone who is more conservative leaning, but I don't necessarily fit the bill for a full-on conservative.
Right.
Whereas you're someone who's more liberal leaning and you don't always fit the bill for someone who's super liberal. For example, of the two of us, you would think I'm the one who would own the guns.
Right.
But I don't own a single one.
Right.
You do.
I am for listeners who don't know, I am a gun owner, but I'm also a very, very strong proponent of gun control. But I would say, other than that, I think I am pretty staunchly, what you would describe as a bleeding heart liberal. I think.
See, but yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I think that on pretty much every issue. Well, even on the gun issue, like my political beliefs still line up very much with the quote unquote liberal agenda. It just so happens that I also I own guns because they were actually all of them have been gifted to me, but it wasn't. It's something I was, raised around. It's, it's a part of my my upbringing, and it's I enjoy going out and target shooting, but I absolutely understand the need to regulate guns and force for us to do a better job of making sure that certain people don't have guns. And I, if I ever needed to change, my particular ownership situation, I wouldn't really have any or many issues with that.
And not to make this a conversation about gun control, but just to point out the opposite side, right? You are a gun owner who is in favor of common sense gun control.
Yes.
I am a not gun owner who is in favor of common sense gun control, but also thinks that if the government can have it, so should the general population.
Sure. That's, that is some juicy fodder for another episode.
But the reason I bring that up is because
why not
I don't necessarily think that
too, Cameron.
I think everybody should have their own classified documents. Let's make a new amendment. Everyone has the right to bear classified documents.
I think that's documents. Just one of those journals that has the tiny little key that you put in the latch on the front. I think that's
or something from the Roman era.
Yeah,
I've got a scroll from Julius Caesar.
Right.
No, but what I bring that up because I don't necessarily agree with labels. Part of what we're going to have to talk about here is going to put us into some kind of a label,
right,
one way or another, right? You said bleeding heart liberal. I don't think that I fit a typical Republican by any means, and I haven't been a registered Republican in more than a decade.
Right.
As far as I know, at least. But I also don't think that libertarianism fits everything that I believe either. And I bring that up because labels, we tend to use these labels, I think, negatively. We label people so that we can see them as an enemy. And part of the reason we're doing this podcast is to show that even whether you use the labels or not, you don't have to be enemies.
Right. Right. And I mean, I don't disagree with any of that. I would say that the only reason why I do identify as, a Democrat and I'm comfortable with that, or a liberal, is because my personal ideology actually really does fit very well with, the mainstream progressive side of that political spectrum. I absolutely, don't fault anyone for, even if they share my beliefs, I absolutely don't fault anyone for choosing not to use those labels, because I do think, like you were saying, I do think those are, a lot of times just tools that we use to classify the other,
Yeah.
and distance ourselves and dehumanize other people, and just create more, divisiveness and
Well, it creates a form of pseudo nationalism where you're not
yeah,
necessarily patriotic to a country, but you're patriotic to a cause or a party.
yeah.
And that is arguably just as dangerous.
I would say that's correct. I just happen to, fall in line with, this, I think, more specific, defined, political party. But I know tons of people who uh, don't fit that description, and
Right.
that's totally understandable.
So we, in my class, every year we get to United States elections,
Hmm.
right? Because the state of Indiana requires that every time that there's a major election, we have to have a whole week on how the election system works in the United States.
Okay.
And I end up, because one reason or another, there's an election somewhere, I just teach it every year to cover my bases.
Right.
And part of that includes me giving the students an overview of the major political parties in the United States. I do Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green, Constitution, and Communist parties.
Okay.
And Socialist, because there is a difference between Communist and Socialist parties.
Yes.
And we look at what each believes. We break it down into like pros and cons, or maybe not pros and cons, because I might think it's a con, you might think it's a pro.
Yeah, that can be a little
and
subjective, I feel like.
Right. And I try and keep it. You remember in high school we had AP government and we never knew really like what Mr. Pinder was.
Oh, you
He would
didn't?
say something someday. Huh?
I definitely did.
Okay, well, there were some days where I was like, oh yeah, he's super Democrat, and then there were some days where I was like, is he though?
No, he was a libertarian leaning Democrat.
I think that's what he said on like the last day of class.
But I mean, I always felt like that was fairly apparent.
But the ambiguity is what I try and foster, right? That whole center can say things for both sides is what I try and give my students that way.
The information, not the ideology.
And they decide for themselves. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so we go through all this, and then I have them either choose a party, or if they're still kind of on the fence, I have them take a I side with quiz, which isn't perfect, but gives them an idea. And you would be surprised how many of them fall into third parties voluntarily.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
We have so many kids who are, especially the Green Party, which I thought was interesting. And I would be surprised moving forward. Not surprised. I would be interested moving forward to see how the shape of United States politics progresses as this current new generation goes into adulthood with what they value.
Yeah, I mean, I think the prevalence of them siding with the Green Party probably has a lot to do with just the severity of the climate issue.
Right, it's something they value.
Yeah, it's something that they value. It's something that more or less is, at this point, it's impossible to refute, even though some people are still trying to do that for no understandable reason.
I could see in your eyes you were thinking a word that starts with F and ends with ing.
Yeah. So I think it makes sense in lieu of an understanding of these other issues that may put them in another another party, whether it's Democrat, Republican, or Libertarian, Socialist, whatever. Sure. Climate change is at least something that they probably already have a fundamental understanding of, and an understanding of the importance of and the consequences of that, and so they're able to answer more strongly with the questionnaire answers that align with the Green Party.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's going to happen is, and we're seeing this currently with the Republican Party, is that there's
that's what I was
a transformation that has to go on. And I think that either the two parties are going to have to adapt and attract these younger people, which to some extent the Republican Party is trying to do right now.
Right. But they're attracting the type of people that are creating division within the party. And I think the difference in the Democratic Party is
you could say the same thing about the Democrat.
I don't think
you could say the same thing about the Democratic Party.
The Democratic Party is attract the younger generation that's coming into the Democratic Party are simply replacing. It's like an update rather than it's like an update to your software rather than a complete divergence from what the original intent of the software was.
I don't know. I think it's pretty equal on both sides, because I see a lot of vitriol coming from the Republican side of things, and I see just as much coming from the Democratic side of things. I really do. As someone who sits pretty close to the middle, I feel like I get yelled at by both sides equally. I mean, 2020 election, I literally had in the same day a Democrat and a Republican tell me I'm the reason they lost the election. Right. In the same day.
Democrats did,
because I voted third party. So one side told me you lost us. The other side told me you almost lost us.
Oh, well, yeah.
But
I would agree with that.
So which one is it? Which one is it? Both. Did I lose the Republicans or did I? But the point isn't necessary.
It is both, because it's from differing viewpoints. It's just that I think it's a matter of. I mean, yeah, it's a matter of viewpoint.
And see, from my viewpoint, I would say
lose the Republicans the election. They also actually not. I wouldn't even say nearly cost Biden the election, because he, I think, won by one of the at least unpopular vote, which I know is not how it works, but I think it was one of the largest margins in history.
Recent history.
Well, yeah,
I wouldn't say. Because you have the Reagan and the Nixon elections out there. Reagan lost one state, his first or two, his first election. But no, I can see that logic. But my side of it is I didn't lose the election. Your lack of the ability to provide me with a convincing enough candidate to vote for your side almost lost you the election.
Sure, but that's a problem with our two-party system, because I mean,
I agree.
Earlier you said, I talk about all the major parties, and you said, Democrat, Republican, and then you listed four more, and those other four are not major parties. But
they're the next.
Yeah, but they're not major parties, and really, no matter how good their ideas are, none of them are going to stand a chance in a national election, at least, against a Democrat or Republican candidate. It's too much of a foregone conclusion that it's.
And on that note, I think of it. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. But finish what you're saying.
That was
what I was thinking. Okay. Well, what I'm thinking is. No, but the way I think of it is, as someone who's fairly close to center, Democrats are very good with individual freedoms, individual rights, but they're not very good with economic freedom or economic rights. And then I would say Republicans are not very good with individual rights, but are better with economic rights. And you could argue against each side of that, I'm aware, because it's not a clear-cut line. It's a generalization, and I dislike generalizations.
The only thing I'll say is I think I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying. I think that that priorities play an important part within the context. So,
right,
individual rights, or I think really what you mean is human rights.
Well, not just that, because human rights to me are things that you can't live without. Whereas I would say individual rights is your right to make decisions.
I mean, you can live without liberty, and that's a human right.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I
would say, I mean,
not to get too deep into the syntax, I understand what you're trying to say. I see what you're saying.
What their thing, like individual rights, I think in the context that you're speaking, I would classify as human rights. It's those types of things. You're not necessarily, required to also classify them as human rights. But in my way of thinking, that's, when I think of these issues, I think this subject is human rights. And I think, it comes down to priorities, because I think a lot of times when, Democrats are making the fiscally irresponsible decision, a lot of times what they're doing is they're recognizing the impact that it would have on these individual rights or human rights, and not willing to get whatever benefit it would serve, financially to infringe upon, these other rights, that I think are, I think it's priorities difference.
I agree. I agree that it comes down to your priorities at the base level. You're absolutely correct. I think to that end, I disagree with an equal amount of the priorities on each side. And I think that each side has priorities that are not for the best. For example, I mean, one of the things that we hear a lot from the Democratic Party is to increase taxes on the 1% and increase taxes on corporations and companies, which on paper sounds like a good idea, because that means, hey, these people are going to be paying money. But those companies are just going to raise costs on everything else, so that still the people who end up paying those taxes are you and me.
That's why you put a cap on capital gains as well, or the amount that you can pay a CEO, so that they can't just push it off. And the people that are really making the decisions about prices and how these companies run and making them predatory, they now don't get the benefit from their shitty decisions, and it doesn't get pushed off.
But then the problem becomes that the only way that you can avoid that, the only way you can avoid people like you and me at the bottom rung paying for all of these costs that now the corporations have to pay, is by manually regulating the price of every single commodity.
No. I think
because look,
regulate the amount that an individual or a board of directors can benefit from this, and you remove the incentive for them to increase their individual profits, or at least the profits for a small majority. And then what it becomes is true market dynamics, where the best company with the best product is going to do better because more people are patronizing them.
See, in theory, yes, but you're missing out a big part of that, which is that they lose their incentive to progress past a certain point. Because if they know I'm only going to make that, it's true. Because if they know
to create a better product or a better service, not to create better profits for their top tier shareholders.
but you already have that incentive right now, and you already have people who are doing that. Look at, people like Fabletics, right? That is not a huge time clothing brand, but they are trying to market themselves as having the better option. And you see them all over TikTok, all over social media. I don't think that their CEO is a billionaire, and that's genuine. I don't know.
Right.
But if you were to look at, someone like Jeff Bezos when he was CEO of Amazon, if he didn't have that incentive to make Amazon as big as it was, because the bigger Amazon is, the more money he makes, would he have just kept going? I don't know. I don't know that he would have, and maybe he would.
I don't know that he would have either, but I think someone else would have filled his role, and also you wouldn't have people working in warehouses the size of, a small city who can't go to the bathroom because the timer on their scanner won't allow them to, and they have to literally piss in a bottle.
But that speaks to workers' rights, which is a different topic. I'm trying to talk specifically about incentivizing people, because when you take away that incentive, historically speaking, right, as someone who has studied a lot of socialism, a lot of communism, every single time you put a cap on how much the head can make, then, or really any person can make, then they only work until that cap is reached, and then they stop, because what's the point? Right? Now, there's always people who will continue to work because they're in it for the mission, right? I'm a teacher. I only make a certain point. It doesn't matter how hard or how little I work. I make the same amount of money.
Right.
The difference is, do I keep my job at the end of the year? But, if you cap that, you're going to lose that incentive once they reach the amount of effort they've put in to earn $60,000.
For that individual. Jeff Bezos, if, 5 years ago, if Jeff Bezos had suddenly, not been the CEO, really would it have mattered? I mean, what was Jeff Bezos individually really offering that was so essential to Amazon? Or did Amazon already have vision? Sure. I have hopes and dreams as well. Make me the CEO.
Okay. But look at Apple. I mean, Apple had Steve Jobs for a long time. He worked his butt off. They actually got rid of him because they said, your vision, your mission isn't aligning with what we, the board, want right now. They got rid of him. Apple started to tank, and they only started to come back around when they brought Steve Jobs back. As the creator of the company, he had whether it's a vision, an energy, something. Yeah. He brought a special oomph to it, for lack of a better term.
What the French call a certain je ne sais quoi.
Yeah. And I think it's the same with Bezos. It's the same with Henry Ford. It's the same with Ray Kroc from McDonald's.
Possibly,
whether these people are good or not, they have this incentive to make the biggest thing possible so that they can have the most possible. And you can agree with that on a moral level or not. I totally understand that. But they still have that incentive. If Ray Kroc knew that he was capped and was only going to make an X amount of money, he's not going to open up as many McDonald's as he possibly can.
He may not. But what I'm saying is, I think at a certain point, it gets to a tipping point where whoever's quote unquote running the company isn't running the company. They're a figurehead and a celebrity, face to the company at best, and yet they're still in a position of power to influence the amount of compensation that they get. Like, there's a video that I saw recently, and I forget what company this guy worked for, but it was somebody like, I don't think it was Mark Cuban, but it could have been Mark Cuban. But they were being interviewed about quiet quitting. And
Yeah.
This interviewer kind of stated a frustration that, employees don't treat, like, the problem with employees now is that they don't treat the job like it's their own. And the guy said, let me stop you right there. It's not theirs. They don't own the company. They're not making the same money that that I am starting my, this guy speaking about himself. He's like, that I'm
Right.
making, and they're also not putting in the work that I put in to start this company. And if they did, they should go out and start their own company. It's what employers need to recognize is that these people aren't working for you. They're working with you, and you need to bring them along.
I agree 100%.
And at a certain point, I mean, yes, you have visionaries like Steve Jobs, or, a certain amount of genius like Steve Wozniak, his partner. You have an incredibly fortunate set of circumstances and a vivid imagination like Elon Musk, or you have,
Right.
A paradigm-changing theory on manufacturing like Henry Ford. And those are, I mean, individual contributions that matter and are good, but at a certain point you're there because you've kept yourself there and not because you are actually useful or essential to this thing that you've built. You have surrounded yourself
Right.
with other people that are actually doing the work for you, and you could, you can come and go at your leisure, and it's not going to make a damn bit of difference. But you're still making the, $1 billion a year paycheck or whatever it is.
I'll agree with everything up until that last line.
Okay.
Right, because people get fired all the time, CEOs even, for not showing up and doing their jobs. I mean, I think people often underestimate how much work CEOs actually do. I mean, imagine if you're running Google. That is a worldwide, one of the largest companies on the planet.
Yeah.
Right? That guy probably doesn't ever have a break. Truly, he might have some time where he takes vacation.
At least 1 or 2 tiers below the CEO of Google that is doing 1.5 times that amount of work.
And I'm not going to say that they do the most work in the company. I'm saying that we often underestimate how much work the CEOs do. We have painted CEOs as being these lazy billionaires or multimillionaires who sit around and do nothing but tell other people what to do. And that's just not the case in the vast majority of situations.
Well, I don't know if I would put an amount or at least like an estimation of quantity on it. But I do.
But to bring it back,
I think a lot of times it's an overinflated sense of importance when really the actual work being done is by the people that they've hired, and really where they're most useful is just supporting the people that are actually running the company day to day. Like, big ideas are great. The inspiration is great. Having a vision is great. That's not the actual work that is running the company and making it successful. Steve Jobs may be an exception,
right. But at the same time, we've been talking about these huge companies. Let's talk about the CEOs of smaller companies, these local companies. If they don't have that incentive to make as much as they can, are they going to be able to or incentivized to grow their business? But I think the bigger question here is it's the government's job to mandate that? If we look at it, and this is, bringing it back to this purpose of government, is it the government's job to do that? And if so, what level? Is it local, state, or federal? Because a CEO making $200,000 in Los Angeles is not going to be at the same financial level as a CEO making $100,000 in Indianapolis.
Right. So here's my viewpoint on the different jobs or the different roles that federal, state, and local governments should play. I think the federal government should set the standards that are minimally acceptable for governance of the U.S. population. So setting a minimum standard for, level of education, setting a minimum standard for healthcare or access to healthcare, setting a minimum standard for, gun control. It's then up to the states to decide the means and the implementation or the manner of implementation to meet those standards, because not every state is going to need to meet their specific challenges in the same way.
Right.
Look at, I think one important example is the Affordable Health Care Act. The federal government said, if you have over 50 employees or, whatever it was, you need to provide them with some avenue to healthcare. And then it was up to states to create their own marketplace, to, vet their own providers that would be available in that marketplace, and to set up the infrastructure to make it available to the people. Then when you get to the local level are, there's definitely really important things that local governments do that are, specific to their communities, like, land use or deciding the curriculum for the school district, stuff like that. But, as it relates to state and federal governance, the local government is kind of your foot soldiers. So in, using healthcare again as an example, it's federal government has said, this is your minimum for, this is what you need to do to provide healthcare. The states decide how that gets done. And then the local government makes sure that, people have access to it, or that their hospitals are up to the standard necessary to provide adequate healthcare. So I think it's, it gets more specific as you go down. But I think the issue where you and I probably disagree with most is on the role of the federal government. And I think that a lot of times the federal government needs to have a stronger stance when those minimums that they set for, what's acceptable or what we need to be doing as a country are not met.
Right.
A lot of times those arguments come down to, oh, well, it's states' rights, when really it's, it shouldn't be states' rights. It should be, these are things that Americans should get free and clear.
Yeah.
And you're infringing on that, and you need to shape up or there's going to be consequences.
So actually, I agree with that. I think that the federal government's job should be to dictate what human rights are and then enforce those human rights in the 50 states. I mean, if we look at the preamble to the Constitution, it says that, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So those are essentially the 6 purposes of the Constitution,
right,
of the government, as the founding fathers say it. And the debate comes down to, what do these terms mean? And, I think that, to form a more perfect union is the idea of keeping us together. Together we are strong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think federal government should have the ability to say, you need to stay with us, you need to work with us. I think establish justice, the idea of making sure that if you get in trouble in California, you're getting in trouble for the same thing in Virginia.
Yes.
Right? You can't do murder in one place and not in the other. Right. Cohesion. Same with ensure domestic tranquility. It's the same basic idea, right? To keep people at peace.
Yeah.
Common defense, right? If someone invades us or we need to go to war.
Yeah. If someone invades Oregon, it's not like California gets to be like, oh, that's not our problem.
Exactly. Promote the general welfare. So again, we need to take care of everybody on a basic level and secure the blessings of liberty. Again, make sure people have freedom. Other than that, right, I don't see a need for the federal government to be so involved in our lives like they are. I think it should be the states. I think it should be the local government. I like how you mentioned it, where the federal government basically says, here's the idea, states implement it, local governments enforce it or make sure it's going on properly.
Yeah.
I like that. I think it should also work the other way around. The federal government should tell us and enforce what human rights are, but we should be the ones telling the federal government what those rights mean to us or which rights we value.
I think that's ideally how that should work, because the people that are in the federal government who are actually, in the position to make laws are, the legislative branch, and they are voted on by, the people within the states. And I think that's, the fact that doesn't always work well, I would actually say a lot of times doesn't work well. It speaks to, the importance of voting, even in, even if it's not a presidential election, vote for, your district representative, vote for your senators, vote for your local politicians, vote, anytime you get a chance to vote, because that is how we, the people, keep, all levels of government in check and in line with what we actually want as a constituency. And I think that, a lot of the, I don't think that that's, happened a lot, and why we have so much or so many less than qualified or less than ideal people within the federal government, and why it doesn't always work the way that, we want it to. And that makes us discouraged, and then discourages us from voting because we think it's futile.
See, but looking at some of the statistics here, and this is coming from Senate Democrats .washington.gov. In 2022, there were 308 total bills that passed both the House Representatives and the Senate. And 94.48% of all bills that passed were bipartisan. According to Wikipedia, which I know it's got a bad stigma, I don't think it's deserved, but
no, I think
Congress has an
it's a great resource.
Yeah, I figured you did. That's more for the listeners.
Yeah.
But according to them, according to Wikipedia, Congress has enacted approximately 200 to 600 statutes during each of its 115 biennial terms. So that since 1789, more than 30,000 statutes have been enacted.
Okay.
And granted, some of those have been enacted and struck down as need be, but that is a staggeringly high number to me. 308 in 2022. Can you think of 308 different bills that were passed or needed to be passed?
But I'm also not.
And the average length,
what those bills entailed.
True.
Or make a value judgment on them unless I do know what they entail. I don't think that's. I mean, this kind of gets me to a question I was going to ask you. What is maybe 2 or 3 examples of areas where you think the government has overstepped its bounds, and the federal government specifically? Like, what are your big, like, inspirations for this take on limiting federal oversight and reverting to states?
So one of them is this. One of them is the amount of bills that get passed and how long they are, because we're at the point now where most bills are several hundred pages.
Yeah.
And up even into the thousands. Sorry?
How much of that is earmarking and just, pork bill spending?
But that's part of the problem. right? That's what I'm saying is part of the problem is you have these bills like the Dodd-Frank bill was over 1,800 pages. And
Right.
I would be willing to put down good money that not everything that was in that bill was relevant to the issues it was intended for
Oh, certainly not.
because of earmarking.
But that's, I
But
mean,
that's part
that's
of
the
my problem.
currency that they use on Capitol Hill and, elsewhere. That's not the question I'm asking though, is what specific issues do you think
That is,
should be left to states and have been overruled by the federal government?
this is one. I think states should be passing the bulk of the legislation because, I mean, one of my big issues with some of these major tax bills is that they say a certain percent of what you make, but that percent of what you make may impact you more. Let's say 5% of your income is going to hurt you a lot more in California, where cost of living is significantly higher than giving up 5% of your income is in Missouri
Yeah.
or Iowa,
Okay.
right? And these bills that are 1,800 pages long or hundreds and hundreds of pages long that are meant to be a blanket for everybody, but don't always cover individual circumstances. We're at the point now where, like it or not, the three states that pretty much run the elections are California, New York, Texas, and Florida, right?
I mean,
And,
four.
two of those are always going to vote blue. One of those is probably going to vote red most of the time.
Yeah.
And the other is Florida. And who knows what Florida's going to do, right?
Nothing
And
good, I can tell you that.
But I mean, I think that just the sheer amount of bills that the federal government passes is a gross overstep because I think a lot more of that should be handed over to the states.
Sure.
And I will admit that states don't always do it.
Are you looking at how many bills get passed in each state? Also, are you considering, I think in Oregon, I think the Oregon legislature meets maximum of twice a year. Now, I'm not sure how long their sessions are, but they have a very limited time to actually present and argue about different bills on the docket. And
yeah,
that's a failure of the state and how the state has chosen to run.
But the state is choosing to run like that because the federal government's taking care of everything else.
I don't think that's true.
Right. I think it's a bit of both. I think the government is filling in because states are falling short, but I also think a lot of states are intentionally falling short because they don't need to worry about it. That's a federal government problem.
Kind of like we were
and I
talking
think that's
about
something that is slowly.
Tuition and federal funding.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's a two-sided issue. Yes, there are some states that are falling short and need to step it up, but there are a number of states, I would wager the majority, which are falling short because they don't have to worry about it because the federal government's doing it. And I think it should be the opposite. Another instance where I think the federal government has overstepped its bounds is the debate over gun control.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I don't think there should be gun control laws. I think there should be. I think we have set a precedent of it being a state enacted thing. And I think the federal government should be helping to enforce those state laws. I don't think they should be making blanketed issues because, let's be honest, you live in an urban environment, you probably have less need for a huge firearm than you might out in the countryside. No one's fighting off grizzly bears off their property in Chicago.
Yeah, in Chicago.
But people are fighting off grizzly bears in Alaska, right? So do you need a sawed-off 8-gauge shotgun in Chicago? Probably not. Do you need one in Alaska?
The way my cousin who lives in Alaska scared off bears, and granted these were black bears, but the way he scared off bears in his backyard in Alaska was by opening the back door and running out with trash can lids and banging them together.
Yeah. Right. Noise. But, I think your needs for firearms are going to be different in different states. And I think those states should have the right to regulate what firearms can be sold, used, or enter into. And I do think there needs to be better regulation on interstate travel of firearms.
Uh-huh.
Right? If you're a state that's very strict, you shouldn't be able to go to a neighboring state that's very loose,
Yeah.
right? You should be held according to the state that you're in. I'm 100% for that. I think another thing that the federal government has overstepped their boundaries on, to me,
Well, wait,
is
before we get off of that issue, can I just point out?
Sure.
So I just did a quick search and found a report from Pew, which, I mean, I think you and I both agree that's a reputable source.
Yeah. Mostly, yeah.
I'm just looking at the color-coded map right here. So your argument is that rural areas and therefore rural states have more of a necessity for guns. Is that more or less correct?
I would say not necessarily for guns, but for larger guns.
Okay. So I'm looking at just the color-coded map. There are 7 states that are, the darkest color brown, which signifies higher rates of gun deaths. Those states are Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico, Alaska, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. I think.
So is this gun deaths?
This is gun deaths.
Okay.
This is gun deaths per 100,000 people, age adjusted by state, and all of those had a result of over 25 deaths per 100,000 people. So I think what that shows is that those are all fairly rural states. And so just because, I mean, there may be more of a necessity, certainly in Alaska, you're fighting off grizzly bears or, what have you, that higher instance of gun, or that prevalence of gun culture, I'll maybe say that, seems to be translating into a measurable increase in gun deaths.
So I will save my third thing for later. We are out of time. I have to be somewhere. But thank you for listening to Agreeable Disagreements. Andrew, do you want to give us our sign-off real quick?
Yes. First of all, thank you to everyone who's listening. Please, if you can, follow us on whatever platform you're consuming our content. Thank you to Halcyon Club for letting us use their song "This Life is Tough But Fair" from their EP Headset Emotions. And also remember that Jack Black's mother was instrumental in bringing the Apollo 13 mission safely back to Earth.